Hi everyone, a very warm good morning and welcome to the Azure Community Conference. Before anything, before session details or even my introduction, I would like to thank Microsoft for this wonderful and amazing virtual knowledge sharing opportunity. I'll begin with my introduction. I am Kanika Pasrija, working as a software engineer in GitHub. I joined GitHub this year itself. Before that, I was working with Microsoft IDC in the Azure DevOps team, and it has been an amazing experience for me working in both the companies. Now, let's talk about this session. So, I'm giving this session on GitHub Actions setting Azure infrastructure. When the team started posting at multiple sites about the coming Azure conference and even the session details, I got pings from multiple people. They were concerned, like, will I be able to understand your session? Like, I'm not aware of GitHub Actions. What are those? Some insight, something like that. So, like I promised to them that I'll make sure that everyone understands it comfortably. So for that, I'll be giving brief introduction about what GitHub Actions are and what are their benefits and how they actually help us in adding maturity to our pipelines. So let's talk about GitHub Actions. So GitHub Action is basically some kind of a standalone command which can help us automate tasks of the software development life cycles. It can be understood maybe something similar to an API, which there's some cause on GitHub and then we have an effect corresponding to it. So that this, in simple terms, it can be understood in that way. There are actually multiple components which help us execute any kind of an action. So to make easier for everyone to understand what GitHub Actions are and how they solve our basic requirements, I'll give a brief introduction about what the components are, the core concepts of the GitHub Action. So on the right side, it's a sample workflow file which I have considered. What is a workflow? It's basically something that glues up all the actions which are to be executed. So it's a test action job there. And I'm considering just a very, a basic example so that we won't go much in details or complexities. So this is a workflow file, which the name, as it says, it's CI workflow. And then this next thing on push. So on push specifies the event on which the workflow will get triggered. So events are basically certain activities which trigger the workflow. It can be a basic push like this. So, when anyone pushes the code to the repository, the workflow will get executed. It can be something when a new issue on our repository gets created, then the workflow gets executed and so forth. There can be multiple scenarios. So yes, they are event based. And then next coming to jobs. So to execute actions, we need some kind of, say, virtual machines. And the jobs have their own virtual machines for that. And in general, the tendency is that the jobs will execute in parallel fashion. Otherwise, if we have some kind of a requirement, say one action depends on the other action, like basically one job depends on the other job, then we can also configure the serial workflow. And for every job, we can specify the environment in which it has to be executed. So here, for example, I've specified Ubuntu latest. So we can, also have some different versions if you want to get executed and, easily configurable, we can add that. This is about jobs. And coming one line down the granular level is what is called steps. So steps, they are in a particular VM. So they share the file system so that, for example, if you want to access some output of one step to be accessed by other, so that can be made possible. That is why they have a shared file system. So in this workflow file, which you see, this can be understood like whenever there's a push to the repository, the CI workflow will get executed. And the job, which is the test action job, it means that certain steps will be executed on Ubuntu latest. What are the steps? Basically, first one says it's using the checkout action, which is checking out the code from the repository. Then it's using the another action, which is the Azure login action. With cred specifies whatever the inputs the action requires. So here the login action requires Azure credentials as inputs. So we are specifying those credentials for the login action. Next step is we are setting up the Node.js environment. So we are giving the Node version for that and using the setup node action for that. Next, we run. Yes, we can simply run the commands for that. We run the npm install production. So this actually tells, like, whenever you are maybe pushing up any changes to the repository, this will do some setup. And, further down the line, the workflow can have some test executions and so on. So this is how we execute some actions in a workflow file. I guess this makes, this provides some clarity about what GitHub Actions are and, what components are used and, so that one can easily understand what a workflow file is meant to do. So this was about actions and using them and their core components. Now let's, just have like why we even doing it, learning something makes sense only if it has good importance or something where we can actually use. So I'll give a brief insight about what the benefits the Azure, GitHub Actions offer to us. So these are the value offerings. Yes, as we saw, like those are event-based actions are there. That we have some triggers, so they can help us enable the world-class CI/CD setup. In the screenshot, you can see is it's a very common scenario when multiple folks are working on a single repository. So every time someone, checks in the code, or even if I say even a single person, if it's working on a repository and you check in some changes in the code and, you want some criteria to be tested, like before you can actually merge that. Obviously, some people do unit tests at their end, but if the repository is huge, not every time you can execute all the tests. So for that, obviously, since GitHub Action is providing you the automation facility, why not use that? So one of the sample scenarios is when we were doing our npm installation in production. So then we figured it out, one of the tests was failing. So such small things like is this save a lot of time, and when either like for example, if something negative would have happened or someone would have by mistake merged a code and something would not have been tested, then it would have costed us a lot. So these kind of things help a lot. And from the entire UI to the API, everything is integrated with GitHub, so you need not do any kind of manual process to set this up or anything like that. You just have a simple workflow file, write whatever job you want to execute, set the trigger, and it's all done. And you can see there are searchable and linkable logs. So whatever action that you're running has some logs associated with it. So even if you want, some colleague or friend to help you with the issue that is coming, you can easily share that link to the log, and you need not download some stats or log files and then share the use logs. It's an easy one. You just share the link and you're good to go. Then we have matrix builds. So multiple times we have something like we have a script or some deployment or something like that has to be done in more than one environment. By more than one environment, it can also mean, we can address different scenarios, like maybe testing it in a Linux environment or maybe a Mac one. So you can specify that using the concept of matrix builds. As you can see here, that runs on is the kind of an array, and it lets parallel execution in all the environments so that your works become easier. And then we have something which is called a built-in secret store. So obviously, if you're creating a workflow file, or maybe if it's a third-party involvement there, you won't want to put up your secret there accessible to everyone in your workflow file, right? So what you can do is you can use the GitHub's built-in secret store, which is, every repository in GitHub has its own secret store. You can directly initialize your secrets and use that directly in your workflow file. For example, in this case scenario, the Azure credentials is one of the inputs required by the Azure login action. So we can directly, specify the SPN required in secrets and directly use it here simply without, being concerned about security and those kind of related factors. Tasks become easy. And definitely it's easy to write and easy to share, so that, the though I'm explaining this in a quite a bit detail so that everyone feels comfortable, but if I'm not wrong, looking at this file, some things might be intuitive. Okay, this is just checking out the code, and this is the checkout action, or this is whatever the parameter requires. Right. And this is community powered workflows. GitHub is at the heart of community. So, anything you can build upon GitHub, you can fork it out, you can edit it and make it completely yours. That is, yes, what GitHub offers to you. I hope this provides you much clarity about the, the some benefits of the huge range of benefits offered by GitHub. So there are a lot of GitHub actions which have been developed, not just only by GitHub, but a lot of contribution from the community itself. And you can write your own actions on your own using maybe a Docker or a JavaScript. And I'll just give you a slight glimpse of the marketplace where we have the actions there. So this is the marketplace that we have, and there are a lot of actions there, which, some you can have like for particular needs, like say you want to have analysis over your code quality, which, maybe some security aspects or your syntax or something like that. And then you have the continuous integrations actions, which you can have as GitHub Actions enable you to set up the world-class CI/CD setup. Then you have something to, for the monitoring process to see what is your impact of code changes that you're doing. Then you also have related to project management, and the list is long. So you can go there, explore more, figure it out. Whatever your needs can be easily solved by GitHub Actions. Your automation of processes will definitely save a lot of your time. And not just that, if there's something that you feel needs to be tweaked or some changes that you particularly require, you are, most welcome to create your own actions. There are a lot of documentations available how to create your own actions and how to publish that to the marketplace even. And I'm really glad to say that there's a lot of community contribution in GitHub Actions. People are coming up with their specific needs, since it's easy to write and easy to share, people are actually just going it and all. And just one more thing I would like to add is GitHub Actions repositories are public. So whatever if you feel, sometimes this is satisfying your requirement, but maybe you would like to have some kind of additional thing, you can obviously, contact that team, or, just have a look at their code if you want to make changes specific to your particular very requirement. Then you can fork it out, make those changes and use that. If you feel that the requirement that you're having might be, solving some problem at a bigger scale, you can either create an issue in that repository and reach out to the folks working on that action as well. So I guess that's pretty much more or less about GitHub Actions, the available one, how to write your own actions. Now let's switch back to the presentation, and as per our agenda, let's talk about infrastructure as code. So, gone are the times where setting up IT management setup means actually, someone would go physically, set up a server, configure it manually, and, a lot of processes involved. So that was a big hectic time, but with huge range of cloud solutions available now, that problem is pretty much solved. So using infrastructure as code basically means, like, for example, if you have some source file of a program, the same source files would create same binary outputs in different machines, the same infrastructure as code model will create same infrastructure or configurations in different machines. So, you will have some kind of code files which can, actually run on multiple machines, creating the similar configuration that is required. And even if you want to have some differences in the configuration, you can handle those in the files with much convenience. as compared to a person would, go there, remember those things have to be done separate in this, or something like that. So that solves a lot of problems. And the value of infrastructure code is huge. And there are three measurable parameters which we can actually consider while, realizing this value. So those are cost, speed, and risk. So cost, it will obviously reduce. Like, you now, the person probably who was supposed to go there, do some manual setup is now can be, do some other kind of a work which just adds value to the company. And definitely that lengthier process is now shorten up, and just also adding it to the faster execution, just enhancing the speed of the entire process, because now you're just using simple code files and making your work go. In decreasing manual involvement in setting up the infrastructure obviously reduces the risk. So, sometimes if, like, even if I have to set up, for example, 2 to 3 virtual machines, but one might be having some other configuration requirement, the other might having. So that's something that has to be taken care of manually. And, I guess we have started loving things which are getting automated, or, something which just happen with a click, click, click. Like, we don't want to actually read those entire files and go, right? And that is why this infrastructure as code is helping a lot, and more companies are coming up with their own tools to set up this. I have some examples for you. One of them being Terraform by HashiCorp, and then we have CloudFormation by AWS, Azure Resource Manager by obviously Microsoft, and Google Cloud Deployment Manager by Google. So these are some, like, we have a huge list. And I guess just moving from human or manual intervention to set up some complex things to automated process, they're just, simply very easy, and something that we would love to do too. So now let's consider a very basic scenario. For releasing anything to the consumer market, we developers know that, setting up infrastructure is required primarily in 3 environments. One being development environment, second test, and third, obviously, the production environment. So if you have to release any kind of a product, you require infrastructure setting up in all these environments. And, those infrastructure requirements might differ just a slight a bit in the environment, and sometimes it might not even differ, right? So those things are a prerequisite to release any kind of a product. So when it comes to configuring those things manually, problems will occur, right? And let's see. So one of the basic thing is, even if it's a, not a more than a day process, then also it's something which is repetitive, and it will be more efficient if we can use code to do that, right? Having it to do multiple times across the environment is not something that we are looking for. It just takes a lot more time than actually required. Then, since it's a manual process, there will obviously be risk. Risk can be related to like anything. Sometime, you deploy some resources incorrectly, maybe missed out on some configuration, which can be either performance related, storage related, or it can be anything, right? We know, like, we humans can make mistakes, though it is okay. Like, there will be a slight risk involved. And obviously, for such scenarios, usually we have some kind of IT personnel dedicated to do this configuration setup. And this, just puts up a huge dependency on one person. And if that one person, changes the team, or maybe leaves out the company, which is not a rare scenario nowadays, it just shakes things a bit. And this is not something that we're actually looking for. So understanding that there might be different problems, and we also understood different companies coming up with different tools as solutions to these kind of problems, we have something called the ARM deploy action by GitHub. Yes, it comes to the rescue, which is not much complicated to use, as now we know what actions are and what components of actions are, say, be the trigger, the jobs, and the steps, I guess it'll be a bit easy for you to even, play around with this action. So let me tell you what deploy action is. So deploy action is a GitHub action that can, simply used to deploy templates, as the name suggests. Very simple. So it can, help you automate your workflow to deploy the templates and even manage your Azure resources. So as some of you might already know, there are different level of scopes in Azure. So one is, management level scope. The other is subscription level scope. Then third is resource group scope. So as per our requirement, this action enables us to deploy resources at whatever scope we require. For example, if I want a policy to be set up, that might be probably I want it at the management scope. So yes, I can choose whatever management group I want and set up a policy there using the simple template. The other example could be I want to set up, for example, a cluster. So since it's Azure AKS, I want at some resource group, I want that to be created. That can also be simply done by specifying the resource group. So this is about deploy action. And let's go with the demo. And with the demo, I'll show you the deploy action repository also and, things related to it. So this is the deploy action. And as I mentioned it to you that the action repositories are public. You can actually go see the source code. If you have some suggestions, feel free to create issues there. And if you have some very basic requirements particular to your case, you are free to fork it and edit it and make it yours. So this is deployment action, which has dependency on the Azure login action and the checkout action, which as the name suggests, the Azure login action, it can be used to just log into Azure simply with the Azure credentials. And checkout is basically, to check out the code of your repository so that, you can easily access the files and it is that scope. So I won't go much into the different kind of conditions for the action that you can use. And it's a basic, simple, you can consider this example. For example, we have this, you can just specify that you need to use this action since it's as I mentioned, there are multiple scopes that you can use. By default, we have resource group deployment scope. So if I'm not specifying that scope explicitly, it means that I'm using the resource group scope. So we can specify the subscription ID, the source group name, template, and the parameters. So template is basically the template that I'll be using. And for templates, I guess there are, some scenarios like where you already have some kind of resources deployed in some subscription or maybe some resource groups, and you want to have, just pick up that up and replicate it in another environment or something like that. So even Azure has this option available. So I'll just show that to you. Like I have one web app deployed by the name of the conference itself. So this is the web app, and there you have an option of exporting the template. So if you scroll down in the automation tag, you have export template. This will give you the template of that particular resource. This, it has by default, it has the parameters included in the template. Either you can use it along with it, or if you want to, make some changes, specify something separately, you can do that as well by using parameters separately. So this generates a template, and you can directly use that template in the deploy action. And not just that, there is a GitHub repository available, which is this, the Quickstart templates. It has a huge range of templates, the templates, which you can use to deploy the resources. There are multiple, not just one scope, but they have it for all the scopes, resource group, subscription, as well as management. So you can, as per your requirement, you can use maybe deploy an app function, maybe deploy a web app with a database, or Azure policy, a Cosmo DB, something that fulfills your requirement. So this was a quite glimpse about what is the deploy action, how to use that. For the demo purpose, I have one particular scenario. So this is the template, or as we discussed, the workflow file which glues together all the actions. So this I have kept as the trigger as on push. This is the web app deployment, and I am running it in the Ubuntu. And this is the concept of the workflow files. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but you can also set the environmental variables which are used further down the actions, so that it's something similar to whenever you have your own code files and you create some variables in the start, and you want to access it down the functions, something very similar to that. Now we have, as we got to know, that it has dependency on the checkout action. So we are checking out the code, and we also have the dependency on the login action, which uses Azure credentials as an input. So Azure credentials, what I have done is I'll show you the secret store. So for any kind of GitHub repository that you have an inbuilt secret store, as we discussed. So here I have put up Azure credentials as well as the subscription ID as the credentials, because these something I feel are not to be made public. So I can use them simply in my workflow using the secrets keyword, and the SPN that will give me access to deploy the resources is basically what I've stored in Azure credentials. To know how to create that, you can also have a look at the Azure login action. And now what I'm doing is I am simply creating a resource group at certain subscription, and within the same resource group, I'll create a Linux web app. So for that, I'm using, again, for both the things, I'll be using the deploy action. The difference will be, for resource group, I'll be using the subscription scope, and for creating a web app, I'll be using the resource group scope. Okay, so here I'm creating resource group with the subscription ID. Yes, I mentioned it in my credentials as I showed you in the secret store. I have a template and I have parameters for that. Resource group, I can specify the resource group here using the environmental variables. So, it becomes very easy. So if I am in my dev environment, I can name my resource group, say resource group for dev environment here itself. And the same can be picked here while creating the resource group. And while I'm creating the web app, the same resource group it can address to and create the web app in that particular resource group. So I'm having a template for web app template. I'm creating a simple Linux web app. And again, I have a separate parameter files, and I'm specifying the web app name. So specifying the resource group name and web app name explicitly helps us override the parameters, which might already be there in the parameters file. Because sometimes, there might be a lot of parameters there and you would want to just override a couple of them. So overriding parameter helps in a lot of scenarios. So so let's just make some changes here and see what happens. So this is for test environment. So let's try and, create a resource group as well as a web app for now production environment. I'll just change the names, and the templates we already have are same, assuming that I want the same kind of configurations of all the resources to be deployed in the multiple environments. I'm keeping everything same. Otherwise, you can also change that as well. Maybe you can override the parameters. Okay, and now this is, since it's on push, the time I commit this, the action will run. So I'll run this saying that creating resources for production environment, and I commit my changes. And there's a tab of actions where I can actually go and see that my execution of action has started. And as we discussed, the major benefit of using GitHub Action is also that we get the real-time feedback and linkable logs. And this is how it happens. The job is being set up. It will follow the entire steps as we specified in the workflow file. So checkout has been done. Now it is, using the credentials that we have specified to do Azure login, and that will create a resource group. So let's go for the resource group. So let's see if we have a resource group RG4. We have one for the test environment. Let's wait for the one to get created for the production environment. This is complete. So we should get one here. Let's see. Yes, here we are, RG for production environment, but it's not having any resources for now because the workflow is still in process. We are deploying a web app. So what we can observe is before even creating a deployment, it validates the template for certain, some basic checks. And if there's some validation issues, it will just report you here as well, which either you can debug, or since it's shareable, you can ask a friend for help too. Okay, and now let's see. Just let's wait for a couple of, I'm not saying couple of minutes, let's wait for 10 to 15 seconds and let's see. I hope we'll have the web app up till then. Obviously, it is taking much, much shorter than, manually going even to the Azure web portal and, clicking on the web app, specifying whatever tech stack do you need and whatever resource group name and all of those things. It just makes things easier. So now, yes, it is successful. We have created deployment. And now if I see and I'll refresh it, yes, we have an app service, and as per the specified configurations, we have that app up running in the specified resource group. It was just easy. I just changed some parameters, and the way I had it in my test environment, now have it in production. And not just that, even if it's for a single environment, you might face scenarios where, some end resources have to be created. So I myself have actually faced this problem, when, for some basic kind of application creation, I had to create even 4 to 5 resources. Then I used to go manually, create new, specify all the details, though I might be already having some replica already existing. So why not just export template and, make the action do all the work? So this was about the demo for the deploy action and how it is helping us solve the problem of manual configuration and how it helps us, actually implement infrastructure as code and makes the life easier. So this was about the demo. I hope you like it. And this was all about my session. If you have any questions, any feedback, feel free to reach out at developer@github.com. And if you have any kind of feedback for me, and if you want to ask any questions, you are free to reach out to me on this linkedin.com/in/Kanika Pasrija. And, enjoy all the sessions of this wonderful conference. This is just day one. We have just started. Now you are most welcome to join the virtual networking session after this. And goodbye, stay happy, stay safe, keep smiling. Bye-bye.